Unexpectedly, he was overshadowed by the grandeur of the events. Seen beside them, he lost in stature. But it never occurred to Yurii Andreevich to measure him by such a yardstick. He was surprised at Nikolai Nikolaievitch's calm, at his light and detached tone in speaking of politics. He was more self-possessed than most Russians could be at that time. It marked him as a new arrival, and it seemed old-fashioned and a little embarrassing. But it was something very different from politics that filled those first few hours of their reunion. That made them laugh and cry and throw their arms around each other's necks, and punctuated their first feverish conversation with frequent moments of silence. Theirs was a meeting of two artists, and although they were close relatives, and the past arose and lived again between them and memories surged up and they informed each other of all that had happened during their separation. The moment they began to speak of the things that really matter to creative minds, all other ties between them vanished, their kinship and difference of age were forgotten, all that was left was the confrontation of elemental forces, of energies and principles. For the last 10 years Nikolai Nikolaevich had had no opportunity to speak about the problems of creative writing as freely and intimately as now. Nor had Yurii Andreevich ever heard views as penetrating, apt, and inspiring as on that occasion. Their talk was full of exclamations. They paced excitedly up and down the room, marveling at each other's perspicacity, or stood in silence by the window drumming on the glass, deeply moved by the exalting discovery of how completely they understood each other. Such was their first meeting, but later the doctor had seen his uncle a few times in company, and then Nikolai Nikolaevich was completely different, unrecognizable. He felt that he was a visitor in Moscow and persisted in acting like one. Whether it was Petersburg that he regarded as his home, or some other place, remained uncertain. He enjoyed his role of a social star and political oracle, and possibly he imagined that Moscow would have political salons in the style of Madame Roland's in Paris on the eve of the convention. Calling on his women friends at their hospitable apartments in quiet Moscow back streets, he amiably teased them and their husbands on their backwardness and parochialism. He showed off his familiarity with newspapers, as he had done formerly with books forbidden by the church, and Orphic texts. It was said that he had left a new young love, much unfinished business, and a half-written book in Switzerland, and had only come for a dip into the stormy waters of his homeland, expecting, if he came out safe and sound, to hasten back to his Alps. He was pro-Bolshevik, and often mentioned two left-wing social revolutionaries who shared his views, a journalist who wrote under the pseudonym of Miroshka Pomor and a pamphleteer, Sylvia Kotary. "It's frightful, what you've come down to, Nikolai Nikolaevich," Alexander Alexandrovich chided him. "You and your Miroshkas. What a cesspool. And then that Lydia Pokori." Kotary corrected Nikolai Nikolaevich, and Sylvia. "Pokori or potpourri, who cares? Names won't change anything. All the same, it happens to be Kotary, Nikolai Nikolaevich." Insisted patiently. They had dialogues of this sort. What are we arguing about? It's so obvious that it makes you blush to have to prove it. It's elementary. For centuries the mass of the people have lived impossible lives. Take any history textbook. Whatever it was called, feudalism and serfdom or capitalism and industrial workers, it was unnatural and unjust. This has been known for a long time, and the world has been preparing for an upheaval that would bring enlightenment to the people and put everything in its proper place. You know perfectly well that it's quite useless tinkering with the old structure. You have to dig right down to the foundations. I don't say the whole building mayn't collapse as a result. What of it? The fact that it's frightening doesn't mean it won't happen. It's a question of time. How can you dispute it? That's not the point. That's not what I was talking about, Alexander Alexandrovich said angrily, and the argument flared up. Your potpourris and miroshkas are people without a conscience. They say one thing and do another. Anyway, where's your logic? It's a complete non sequitur. No. Wait a minute, I'll show you something. And he would begin hunting for some newspaper with a controversial article, banging the drawers of his desk and stimulating his eloquence with this noisy fuss. Alexander Alexandrovich liked something to get in his way when he was talking. The distraction served as an excuse for his mumbling and his hems and haws. His fits of talkativeness came on him when he was looking for something he had lost. Say, hunting for a matching snow boot in the dimly lighted cloakroom, or when he stood at the bathroom door with a towel over his arm. Or when he was passing a heavy serving dish or pouring wine into the glasses of his friends. Yurii Androvich enjoyed listening to his father-in-law. He adored the familiar, old Moscow sing-song and the soft, purring Gromeko R's. Alexander Alexandrovich's upper lip with its little cropped moustache protruded above the lower lip in just the same way as his butterfly tie stuck out from his neck. There was something in common between the lip and the tie, and it somehow gave him a touching, childishly trusting look. On the night of the party Shura Schlesinger appeared very late. She had come straight from a meeting and was wearing a suit and a worker's cap. She strode into the room and, shaking everyone's hand in turn, at once burst into complaints and accusations. "How are you, Tonya?" "Hello, Alexander. You must admit it's disgusting. The whole of Moscow knows he's back, everyone is talking about it, and I am the last to be told. Well, I suppose I'm not good enough. Where is he, anyway? Let me get at him, you. Surround him like a wall. Well, how are you? I've read it, I don't understand a word, but it's brilliant, you can tell at once. How are you, Nikolai Nikolaevich? I'll be back in a moment, Yurochka, I've got to talk to you. Hello, young men. You're here too, Gogochka, Goosey Gander. This to a distant relative of the Gromykovs, an enthusiastic admirer of all rising talents, known as Goosey because of his idiot laugh and as the tapeworm on account of his lankiness. So you're eating and drinking. I'll soon catch up with you. Well, my friends, you've simply no idea what you're missing. You don't know anything, you haven't seen a thing. If you only knew what's going on. You go and have a look at a real mass meeting, with real workers, real soldiers, not out of books. Just try to let out a squeak to them about fighting the war to a victorious end. They'll give you a victorious end. I've just been listening to a sailor Yurochka, you'd simply rave. What passion! What single-mindedness! Shura was interrupted time and again. Everyone shouted. She sat next to Yurii Androvich, took his hand in hers, and, moving her face close to his, shouted like a megaphone above the din. Let me take you along someday, Yurochka. I'll show you real people. You simply must get your feet on the ground, like Antaeus. Why are you staring at me like that? I'm an old warhorse, didn't you know? An old bestuzhevist. I've seen the inside of a prison, I've fought on the barricades. Well, of course, what did you think? Oh, we don't know the people at all. I've just come from there, I was right in the thick of it. I'm collecting a library for them. She had had a drink and was obviously getting tipsy. But Yurii Andreevich's head was also spinning. He never noticed how it happened that Shura was now at one end of the room and he at the other. He was standing at the head of the table and apparently, quite unexpectedly to himself, making a speech. It took him some time to get silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, I should like, Misha. Gogojka. Tonya, what am I to do? They won't listen. Ladies and gentlemen, let me say a word or two. Unprecedented, extraordinary events are approaching. Before they burst upon us, here is what I wish you. May God grant us not to lose each other and not to lose our souls. Gogojka, you can cheer afterwards, I haven't finished. Stop talking in the corners and listen carefully. In this third year of the war, the people have become convinced that the difference between those on the front line and those at the rear will sooner or later vanish. The sea of blood will rise. Until it reaches every one of us and submerge all who stayed out of the war. The revolution is this flood. During the revolution it will seem to you, as it seemed to us at the front, that life has stopped, that there is nothing personal left, that there is nothing going on in the world except killing and dying. If we live long enough to read the chronicles and memoirs of this period, we shall realize that in these 5 or 10 years we have experienced more than other people do in a century. I don't know whether the people will rise of themselves and advance spontaneously like a tide, or whether everything will be done in the name of the people. Such a tremendous event requires no dramatic proof of its existence. I'll be convinced without proof. It's petty to explore causes of titanic events. They haven't any. It's only in a family quarrel that you look for beginnings after people have pulled each other's hair and smashed the dishes. They rack their brains trying to figure out who started it. What is truly great is without beginning, like the universe. It confronts us as suddenly as if it had always been there or had dropped out of the blue. I too think that Russia is destined to become the first socialist state since the beginning of the world. When this comes to pass, the event will stun us for a long time, and after awakening we shall have lost half our memories forever. We'll have forgotten what came first and what followed, and we won't look for causes. The new order of things will be all around us and as familiar to us as the woods on the horizon or the clouds over our heads. There will be nothing else left. He said a few more things, and by then he had sobered up completely. As before, he could not hear clearly what people were saying, and answered them pointlessly. He saw that they liked him, but could not rid himself of the sadness that oppressed him. He said, "Thank you, thank you. I appreciate your feelings, but I don't deserve them. It's wrong to bestow love in a hurry, as though otherwise one would later have to give much more of it." They all laughed and clapped, taking it for a deliberate witticism. While he did not know where to escape from his forebodings of disaster and his feeling that despite his striving for the good and his capacity for happiness, he had no power over the future. The guests began to leave. They had long, tired faces. Their yawns, snapping and unsnapping their jaws, made them look like horses. Before going, they drew the curtains and pushed the windows open. There was a yellowish dawn in the wet sky filled with dirty, pea-colored clouds. "Looks as if there's been a storm while we were chattering," said someone. "I was caught in the rain on my way here. I only just made it," Shura confirmed. In the deserted street it was still dark and the drip-drip of the water from the trees alternated with the insistent chirruping of drenched sparrows. There was a roll of thunder, as if a plow had been dragged right across the sky. Then silence. Then 4 loud, delayed thuds, like overgrown potatoes in autumn being flung out with a shovel from the soft ground. The thunder cleared the dusty, smoke-filled room. Suddenly the element of life became distinguishable, as apprehensible as electric currents, air and water, desire for happiness, earth, sky. The street filled with the voices of the departing guests. They had begun a heated argument in the house and continued arguing just as hotly in the street. Gradually the voices grew fainter in the distance and died out. "How late it is," said Yurii Androvich. "Let's go to bed. The only people I love in the world are you and Father." 5. August had gone by and now September was almost over. The inevitable was approaching. Winter was near and, in the human world, something like a state of suspended animation, which was in the air, and which everyone was talking about. This was the time to prepare for the cold weather, to store up food and wood. But in those days of the triumph of materialism, matter had become a disembodied idea, and the problems of alimentation and fuel supply took the place of food and firewood. The people in the cities were as helpless as children in the face of the unknown, that unknown which swept every established habit aside and left nothing but desolation in its wake, although it was itself the offspring of the city and the creation of city dwellers. All around, people continued to deceive themselves, to talk endlessly. Everyday life struggled on, by force of habit, limping and shuffling. But the doctor saw life as it was. It was clear to him that it was under sentence. He looked upon himself and his milieu as doomed. Ordeals were ahead, perhaps death. Their days were counted and running out before his eyes. He would have gone insane had he not been kept busy by the details of daily life. His wife, his